Welcome back to Canada Tonight. To its fans, Barstool Sports is edgy, funny, a place where a guy can hear real talk about everything sports. But to some others, it's misogynistic, racist, and xenophobic. Well, Canadian sports broadcaster Gord Miller has now revealed he's in the latter camp. It came up when the TSN personality offered to answer his followers' questions on Twitter yesterday, and he was asked if he'd consider appearing on the podcast. Well, he made his feelings known, saying it was a no-go. And now the founder of Barstool Sports has responded, resulting in a war of tweets between the two personalities. It's also sparked a conversation about the culture of sports. And for more, I'm joined now by Shireen Ahmed. She's a multimedia journalist and co-host of the Burn It All Down Feminist Sports podcast. She's also a freelancer with TSN. Hi, Shireen. Good to see you. Welcome to Canada Tonight.
Thanks for having me, Janella.
So, really this conversation, is it about Barstool Sports, or is it about the kind of culture that Barstool represents and allows to be perpetuated in sports in general?
I think it's really important to keep in mind that those two things are not mutually exclusive, and that Barstool culture and Barstool Sports is actually a product of broader sports media. And although they're not a reputable journalistic site, they're a blog that started off by a bunch of people. They don't adhere to the principles. I mean, they've been sued for content theft. They go after, they dox and they go after huge insidious, literally the term is insidious, campaigns of harassment against women journalists and racialized journalists. They use racist language. Dave Portnoy, the president of the company, has used the N-word and unapologetically online. He said in 2016 that Colin Kaepernick was an ISIS terrorist. He once made this comment that if you wear size 6 jeans, you should be open to being raped. There's a history of misogyny, racism, xenophobia, homophobia, and absolutely unacceptable sports language here.
So, obviously it has its audience, it's very popular, but what is it like to have someone like Gord Miller speak out publicly in this way against them?
I think I was contacted many times yesterday, and Gord is, a colleague at TSN, and I think the resounding thing was almost relief, because what's happening is one of the most knowledgeable hockey voices in this country is shouldering some of the work that's always been done by women. I mean, I don't need to tell you what we endure in the media, but in sports media in particular, it's a very precarious place. And what Gord did, and it wasn't a choreographed or premeditated tweet, he was simply answering questions, and he's sharing what he's learned and unlearned, and what he knows to be true. Now, the response from Barstool is the typical way that they cycle through things and they try to flip a narrative. Oh, well, we were just joking, and they're unapologetic. Well, part of being responsible in the space is being accountable, which they are completely not, and sort of saying that he's making up stories. There are very reputable outlets that have reported on this and continue. Robert Silverman at the Daily Beast has written of it. My Burn It All Down co-host Lindsay Gibbs has written of it. This isn't new. This isn't a surprise. It literally just takes a Google search to find out how terrible they are.
Yeah, Shireen, you alluded to the fact, I know what it's like to be one of the only women in hijab in journalism, in TV broadcast news, but I can't imagine what it's like to be a woman in hijab in sports journalism. You certainly don't fit sort of the profile of what people think a sports journalist might look like. What's it like being not just a woman in sports, but a Muslim woman, a racialized Muslim woman?
Well, I think there's level of abuse that you get, and that is compounded by xenophobic or gendered Islamophobic commentary plus misogynistic stuff. So it's always this trifle of, horrific commentary and vitriol. But I love what I do. I think sports are a vehicle for connection between people. I love sports. I always have. And there's a place for me here. Now, what happens with places like Barstool, and they're not the only place, but they're the most popular, is they seek to restrict who can be inclusive. My sports are inclusive, and I mean that across the board. I work from an anti-oppression lens. I've got colleagues who do the same. And for women out there, it's really difficult. You're trying to do your job, but then you're having to deal with all this abuse online, which comes a lot. And to be honest, Janella, I have locked down my Twitter and my social media accounts in preparation for this interview, because that's how that company operates.
Dave Portnoy, you mentioned him, he basically rejected those characterizations. He invited Gord to kind of come and have a debate with him. People have also pointed out that the CEO, Erica Nardini, it's a woman. So that already is kind of pointed to as a solution, that they can't be misogynistic. What more would you like to see in these realms, other than just, for example, putting a woman in a position, in a head position at Barstool?
Well, the very idea that just because you have a white woman as head of your company or CFO, that absolves you of any, that you can possibly partake in misogyny. Women uphold systems of patriarchy and misogyny. Kelly Loeffler was an owner of the Atlanta Dream and literally was taken out of there. The team themselves, the NBA rallied against her. So I refute and I reject these ideas that women can't partake in these terrible systems. We know who voted Trump in, the majority group. So I'm not even going to, I don't even want to entertain that discussion. I think it's a vacuous argument, and women can partake in these very terrible, oppressive ways, and that other women are harmed, and that's exactly what Barstool does. So what Gord did was important, because the voices that we need to hear are the ones with the most privilege, and he did that, and he did it honestly and sincerely, and I want to see more of it, because women are exhausted, and we keep going. We want to do our jobs.
All right, Shireen Ahmed, a multimedia journalist and co-host of the Burn It All Down Feminist Sports Podcast. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us.
Thanks for having me.